شفت ياما ناس مناها تعيش العمر جنبك وبرضه ما يكفيش أحلى دنيا عندي ما تساويش إلا معاك يا رسول الله وحشنا يا رسول الله يا سيدنا شوقنا زاد والله ومهما طول الغياب محمد مشتاق لك والله محمد قلبي عليك صلى طال سؤالي قولي ازاي كده عاش عيوننا حد مش شايفة لو حقيقي هو غالي عليك ارضيه في الجنة تبقى معاه وحشنا يا رسول الله يا سيدنا شوقنا زاد والله ومهما طول الغياب محمد مشتاق لك والله محمد قلبي عليك صلى
Radio Al-Ansar, Durban 90.4 and Petermarisburg 105.6 FM every Wednesday from 8 p.m. with Yunus Sacoor. That's 8 p.m. every Wednesday. Radio Al-Ansar, keeping you informed.
خدا نے مجھ کو دیا تیری دعاؤں سے تیری دعاؤں سے ملا ہے جو بھی ملا تیری دعاؤں سے تیری دعاؤں سے تیری دعاؤں سے جہاں جہاں بھی گیا دل بچھانے لگے جہاں جہاں بھی گیا دل بچھانے لگے یہ ہے تیرا میرا ماں تیری دعاؤں سے تیری دعاؤں سے ماں تیری دعاؤں سے ماں تیری دعاؤں سے ماں کی دعا جنت کی دعا کی دعا جنت کی جنت کی جنت کی یہ کامیابیاں شوق پہ ملے یہ کامیابیاں شوق قدم پہ ملے نصیب मिला माँ तेरी दुआओं से तेरी दुआओं से माँ तेरी.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another edition of News in Focus live on Radio Al Ansar International, broadcasting on the frequency Durban 90.4 FM, Petermarsburg 105.6 FM, and audio streaming on www.alansar.org.za. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaba bikum. My name is Yunus and I will be in your company for the next 2 hours. 8 to 10 p.m. I will be interviewing our guest shortly. The nasheed I just played was a special request from all the females and males that they want to hear the importance of the mother in the life of a human being. Ma ki dua jannat ki hawa. So those that have parents that are living, it's very important that you understand the importance of the mother and then the father. And those that have lost the near and dear ones, it's a reminder that you have to make du'as for those that have left us. Today, the date is the 30th of October 2024 and equivalent to the 27th of Rabiul Akhir 1446 AH. On tonight's show, I've got a very important subject. We know today was the government's midterm budget that the Minister of Finance has presented, and later on in the program we'll have Chartered Accountant Hassan Motala dissecting that. But we're going to chat once again about estate planning, tax, and wills. And with me, I have, 4 CAs or 3 CAs that are present, an MBA graduate and a BA LLB graduate. So I've got qualified people around me, but my bias is towards finance, coming from that background. So my first guest is Mr. Faizal Suleman. Faizal is a chartered accountant. He's in private practice. He's a registered auditor. Faizal, way back on the days, he served his articles with Coopers and Lebron. Faizal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus live on Radio Al Ansar International.
Wa alaikum salam to you and the listeners.
My second guest is Yasmeen Suleman. Yasmeen needs no introduction. I think she's been in the airwaves of Radio Al Ansar many a time with my colleagues. Yasmeen is also a chartered accountant and tax practitioner, a tax partner at Bowmans, but she was also a partner at KPMG, also served articles, an accomplished tax practitioner. Yasmeen, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus live on Radio Al Ansar International.
Walaikum salam. It's good to be back.
Now, both the Suleimans are connected to me one way or the other from my mother's side. They're close connections of mine, and they followed me in the accounting profession. But I want to ask a question firstly to Yasmeen. Yasmeen, when I was in varsity in 74, 75, 76, and then I sort of served articles in a place called David Strachan and Taylor, you weren't born by then.
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
Well, 75, right?
Yes.
I'm giving away my age.
Yes. I think your dad was very keen in ensuring that his daughters are professionally educated and qualified, and no doubt your sister being a medical practitioner, you being a chartered accountant, and your younger sister an attorney. So all three are qualified, and your mom is a pathologist. So you come from a very educated family of medical professionals. But what I want to find out from you, Yasmeen, is we've got a lot of graduates listening to us and a lot of matriculants. They're writing exams, and many of them sort of haven't made up their mind what profession they want to follow. Now, what prompted you to follow the accounting profession? I know eventually you are a tax practitioner, but something prompted you. Can you just explain briefly to our listeners so that it gives them an indicator that, listen, it's a good profession to follow?
So my parents were very strong on educating their children, making sure that we were able to be independent. There was always a huge focus on doing the best you can. And I remember growing up, my parents said, you have to find something that you can do, but when you do it, you must be in the best in that field. There was never any pressure to choose any particular field, so you must follow something that you like. And each of us had to find our own way as to what we like. And I think that is an important thing, that when you follow a career, it must be something you do enjoy doing, because you're going to spend a lot of your time doing that. So it needs to be in keeping with your personality, with your talents, and so on. I remember my mother at one stage even said that it doesn't matter if you even become a professional street sweeper, as long as you're the best at it. So there was never any pressure to choose any particular field, but there was definitely the encouragement to further our studies and follow our own path. To get into accounting, I suppose I always had that. I had passion for numbers. I knew from quite an early age, I was a bit squeamish. I didn't want to go into medicine or anything in the sciences. And being strong with numbers, accounting was a natural fit. I don't think going into it, I understood what the profession was all about. And it was only later on when I went to university and I got to study, a bit more in detail of what the profession is about, that I got to understand it. But once I did, I realized it was the right thing for me. And then specializing in tax was also somehow by accident. It was the guidance of a professor that I was working with that encouraged me to study taxation and additional course in taxation. And then I realized, actually, this is my niche. This is what I want to do. So sometimes, you don't really pre-plan it. As that opportunities come along and you explore them, then you realize, hey, this is my niche and this is what I want to specialize in.
No, excellent. I think those youngsters that are listening, it's a guideline for you that, there are many professions, but this is one profession you must have the aptitude. And from there, you can branch off into many other professions. Like when I sort of was serving articles, and I realized, maybe it's a decent profession, but I don't fancy going and examining other people's books and records. Taxation is boring.
No, it's definitely not boring. Not boring.
No, from my perspective at that stage. And because of the limited opportunities we had then, it was apartheid era at its arrive. Partnership opportunities were limited, and then government opened up to non-whites. And then, we used to earn a pittance when serving articles. At that stage, it was $250 a month. So I reckon, these guys are offering $750, 3 ways out, and there's a pension and everything. Let me switch to an accountant this side. So we got in, and when I got into local government, I'm just giving a kind of an example of how the situation has changed now, which culminated in what you're doing. We then realized the CA is of no value now. You're going to do local government. So there was a separate course of studies, which will then enable you to climb. So alhamdulillah, there were opportunities, and we climbed the ladder and ended up as being a director there, and equivalent to a CA, wherever. But I enjoyed that because it was helping people as well. Not that I didn't enjoy the auditing profession, but now I believe it's very exciting, a lot of diverse opportunities. And I think Yasmeen made the right decision to specialize in taxation, because that's what hurts the people's pockets and the company's pockets, Faizal, I want to bring you in, and I'll bring in Yasmeen later again. You come from a family of pharmacists, also 1-2 CAs there, a businessman. You hail from Foreman Road. I used to visit you quite often there, your family. We were a close-knit family. You were still young during that time because your other brothers were excelling. I went with your brother, Solly, to Cape Town. He became a pharmacist. I went to look for articles that side. You studied maybe in Burnwood High or wherever. Yunus told me he was at Burnwood. I'm not sure whether you were in Burnwood or Centenary. So something prompted you to follow the CA profession. Either it's Yunus, your brother, who's a successful CA, or you felt, listen, my aptitude is finance. Because the youngsters now listening, they got more opportunities than this finance. But you want to tell them that it's a good profession to follow. So what prompted you?
So, we all come from humble background. And at the start, our parents always encouraged us to study. And no pressure on what profession you chose, similar to Yasmeen. But I had brothers ahead of me. And what inspired me was my brother Yunus. He had already pursued the accounting profession, and he was on his way to becoming a chartered accountant. And when I looked at the sort of what comes with being a CA at that time, all that fame and glory, I thought perhaps that might be what I want to do. My friends were determined to become something in health professionals, and then they were like trying to convince me to go that way. But I always had this flair for numbers, and I thought, this is where I want to go. Whatever my choice later in life, I know that having the CA as a background would help me. So initially the thought was that I'll qualify as a CA and then go into business. But with time, I thought, no, and lots of people asked me the question, because initially I did go into business, like, why are you wasting your profession? And someone would ask you, well, you know what, we need some assistance with accounting or tax. And, I'd go towards that. And eventually I started off my practice in 1996. And that's it. It grew from then. So now I'm still a sole practitioner.
Excellent. Well, listen, it at that stage, and even now, it's no doubt a prestigious qualification. As Yasmeen mentioned, being a tax practitioner is even a bigger prestigious, because that's where your pocket hurts and people look at you when they're in trouble. I mean, a colleague of mine said that a huge business, and many huge businesses, have been targeted for huge tax liabilities going into like 50s and 60 millions, etc. So SARS is clamping down. And if you don't have a qualified tax practitioner looking at your tax affairs in the business sector, you could fall short. And Yasmeen, perhaps you would have experienced some of that. But what we're going to do is, I'm just moving away slightly, because the reason why I asked these questions to these two, excellent chartered accountants and practitioners is, our matriculants are beginning to concern themselves and say, you know what, everybody wants to become doctors and get into the medical profession, or maybe other professions like actuarial science, etc. And it becomes problematic later. The chartered accountancy profession is a lucrative profession. There are lots of opportunities. Opportunities are open by all companies, unlike the past, where only a few companies used to take on article clerks, without which you can't write the board exams. And, at the moment we have, and maybe Narend, Ganesh will come in later, that in the government sector, there's a lot of discrimination taking place, and our professionals cannot get in there. Yasmeen, that's a fact. So the private sector is taking on our guys. So the chartered accountancy is one profession. If you got the aptitude for finance and accounting and tax, then by all means study. But it's not as easy a profession as, the sort of qualification may indicate. But what I want to do is I want to bring in Nafiza Kedwa, because today's subject is talking about estate planning, tax and wills. And this is where Yasmeen and yourself, Faizal, are experts. And people don't understand the importance of making sure that no matter how small your estate is, you need to plan, you need to get your taxes in order, and you need to get your wills in order, even from a Sharia perspective. So a couple of weeks ago, I had Nafiza Kedwa in the studio with me, and she chatted briefly about it. I just wanted to recap, so we'll set the scene for our discussion tonight. Nafiza, if you can just recap, we discussed certain areas, and you complained to me that, listen, we don't have enough time to talk about everything. And the financial side, we need the financial gurus. So both of them are here. They can help in the discussion. And we want to simplify the discussion, because there's a lot of listeners. They may be having small assets and a limited, estate that they look at. And many of them are saying, I'll do it later, and maybe later might not come. So, Nafiza, if you could just give us a summary of what was discussed previously.
Assalamu alaikum to the listeners, and Jazakallah for having me once again
Pleasure.
On your show. Yes, indeed, I previously said this is a very, very critical and important subject, and it's just left behind many times because, as I said, it's the surest event in life but least planned for event. Many people shy away from it, or just don't want to accept that death is something that, we all experience. So we've got to plan for it. By way of recap, we discussed the importances of the will, the implications of not having a will, and the implications of intestacy, meaning passing away without a will. And then we also spoke of the importance of seeking proper legal and financial advices. I did mention that estate planning is a process where you actually sit with your expert advisors. And I always suggest a holistic approach where you work together with your financial advisors, your accountants, and your attorney to work up the best solution for how your estate will be distributed, how it will be materialized, and how it will be all unpacked. And many people don't realize that, you build up estates over a period of time. You build up your life over a period of time. And on death, it has to be unpacked to pass on to the heirs. But if you don't prepare for it, you might end up in a position where there's heavy burdens of financial taxes. Capital gains tax is another tax that comes in. Estate duty. There's the winding up process. The administration costs itself are quite hefty, and that is based on the value of an estate. So as I've always previously also said in many of your shows previously, that one needs to actually educate themselves about this area and then seek advices, even if you have a small estate, or even if you think you have no estate, because sometimes you might be inheriting from an estate that you didn't even realize you were inheriting. So from the age of 16, and I think there's a Sharia obligation on most of our listeners are Muslims, and there's a Sharia obligation on making sure your estate or your will is drawn up. And not more than, I think, 3 days should pass without your will having been drawn up. And especially because we live in South Africa, where the law of the land is dominant. Although there is recognition for Islamic law, there's not complete recognition for wills, etc. And if we want to ensure that our wills are or our estates are distributed according to Sharia, and also for the importance of making sure that our children and our loved ones are taken care of after our death, then we would certainly need to approach proper experts.
Thanks for that summary. We'll catch up with you later on in the show. Yasmeen, I want to bring you in. The subject is estate planning, but we also are encouraged to have financial planning. Now, you get various categories of our listeners. Some people are working, they started a job, a professional job. You've got self-employed people, you've got medical professionals, you've got chartered accountants, you've got businessmen. All of them have to do financial planning. Now, estate planning is also important, not at a late age. So perhaps you just want to highlight, I don't know if there's a fundamental difference between financial planning and estate planning, or it's the same thing. Perhaps you just want to explain the difference and why the need for both types of planning from a financial perspective.
I think financial planning is really around, making sure that whatever your earnings are, you are investing a portion of it to see for, to take care of yourself in your old age, in retirement and so on, because you don't want to be dependent on just salaried income when you do, because at the point where you do retire, you want to have passive investments that you can use or retirement funds that you can use. So financial planning is critical, but it's not the same as estate planning. Estate planning is a bit different because you have to think about, I think, several aspects. I mean, the one is who are your beneficiaries going to be? And in terms of Sharia, that's quite defined. There's a bit of discretion, but it's not, there's not full discretion. There's only, I think, 1/3 of your estate that is discretionary, and the rest of it devolves according to certain rules. And, it depends on what kind of assets you've got. You could have an estate that's got lots of assets, but just no cash. And as Nafisa said earlier on, you could end up with a situation where you don't have enough liquidity in your estate to actually make good on your tax obligations. Now, it becomes quite a rude shock to a lot of taxpayers when they realize that actually on death, there's more than just the estate duty implication. There's also capital gains tax. And Treasury has been has been lobbied a few times to maybe remove the capital gains tax, but they said, no, it is necessary to have both, because the capital gain is a wealth tax on the growth in the value, and then estate duty is static, is based on the value at the date of death. So they are adamant it's going to be both. So it's a double whammy on death. And if you don't have sufficient liquidity in your estate, you could end up with a situation where your heirs have to sell away assets just to make good on the tax obligations. So I think estate planning definitely is something different. The extent to which you need to estate plan depends on how much of assets you've got, how much of wealth you've got. If you've got a small estate that's worth less than 3.5 million rands, perhaps it's not as urgent and critical as someone who has more than that, because that's the threshold at which estate duty kicks in. So the more the value of your estate is, the more critical it is it becomes more critical to then plan for it. And that could be, various solutions. You could look at a trust, which may not make sense for everybody. You could look at other means of providing liquidity to your estate, making sure that you have sufficient, sort of cash-like investments, so that your heirs have got something that they can tap into should they require it on your death. So it's more than just your will. You really do need to have an idea of what your assets and liabilities look like. Faizal's got a comprehensive list that he's going to share with you as to what the things you need to consider in order to plan for your death. But as you said, it's an unpleasant thing because now you're contemplating your own demise. It's not, people don't like it, but it's a necessary evil, unfortunately.
Faisal, I want to bring you in. I think Yasmeen's indicated to you that there's a difference. And obviously, death is certain, but the time of death, you don't know. It can catch up any time. And the kind of notices we're getting, young guys are also passing on. And they may have been young as CAs or accountants or medical professionals, and they got to deal with the issue. And as Yasmeen pointed out, it mustn't come as a shock that the wife is left to handle this estate and you don't even have a proper will, you don't even have executors, and you got major problems. So perhaps you just want to go to the process and the list of necessities to consider when doing estate planning and perhaps financial planning, because it runs concurrently. And we will bring in a little bit later the discussion around how the pensioners should manage and what is actually the type of capital gains tax. I'll bring Yasmeen back on that one. So perhaps Faisal?
Thanks, Yunus. So, one of the things that Yasmeen mentioned was liquidity. And from a tax perspective, I think also what needs to be considered is for those surviving and how are they going to pay their sort of day-to-day expenses. So you have to consider that part as well, and to ensure that there's sufficient liquidity to ensure that they've got funds to continue living. In terms of the estate itself, it could take anything from 6 months to a few years, depending on how complex the estate is and how long the master's office takes. At this point, I think there's several challenges that have been experienced in terms of winding off estates with the master's office. So what I also wanted to discuss was, and I'd like to call it a personal file, but others refer to it as a death file. So what you need to maintain in terms of the information that the people you leave behind would need in order to make sure that the estate is wound up as quick as possible and they are informed. I mean, we've had situations where there've been, like you mentioned, youngsters that passed away, even those that are older, and I think it was especially during the times of COVID, where people did not, the surviving spouses and children did not know what the password was to the deceased cell phone, computer. You got all sorts of,
including bank accounts,
credit cards, yes, bank accounts. So, I have prepared a list which is not sort of exhaustive. It may not be applicable in some cases, or you may have other stuff that would be more applicable. So in terms of this file, what information you should keep, copies of your ID, passport, your tax details, put all of your tax information into it, your parents' information. In some cases, it requires that information for some reason or the other. There may be assets that your parents have that you've been part of it because of inheritance. So you need to have your parents' information as well. Your marriage information, your antenuptial contract, whether you're married in community or property, your spouse details, their income tax. They might be surprised to find out that they were a taxpayer during your lifetime as well. So put in their details as well as your children's details. Add your children's details in there with, their ID and income tax details. So if you're in business, the name of all your entities that you're part of, the shareholding that you own, if there's any loans relating to those businesses. In addition, you may have trusts. So again, put that information into your file, with copies of the letter of authority and your trust deed. So you may have financial planning that you did during the course of your lifetime as well. So you've got those information in terms of agreements that you may have, or if you have partners in your business, what are the agreement that has been agreed on in terms of in the event of the demise of one of the partners. If there's any sort of key man policies that are existing with that. Then it was mentioned earlier about your will. I'm not going to mention that part of it, but obviously the original copy of your will needs to be, the family needs to know where's your original will and who the executors are. If there's any agreement in terms of an attorney or an executor, has there been an agreement in terms of fees? Because you don't want to be surprised as well. And that's also going to put some pressure on your estate. So whatever original documents like your property, title deeds, your vehicle, the logbooks, anything relating to that, if there's any sort of safe deposit box, the details of that, where the keys are, list of personal advisors that you may have had interaction with during your lifetime and what their contact details are, your accountant, your attorney, your banker, your insurance broker, as well as your executor. And you may have a specific religious leader that you want to assist in the process. You need to document that. Obviously, a full list of all your assets and liabilities. And I would advise that this information as well be updated regularly, at least once in 6 months. If you have any insurance policies, the details of that, retirement annuities, and as well as who the beneficiaries are that may be listed already. If you employed, your current employer details, any specific information relating to pension funds, provident funds, etc. If you are members of any clubs, professional association, for example, a gym, obviously those need to be cancelled. Your credit card, debit card details. I mean, simple things like your utilities, your electricity, telephone, cell phone, having details of that so that they could continue to pay. I mean, imagine not knowing how to pay the electricity account and that gets disconnected
yes.
because your details are not there. So I think, it's important that all those details be in this file. I mean, if you look at sort of social media, you've got all sorts of things now, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, etc. I think you want to put those details, although some people may not want to, but it's important, I think, your passwords to that and your laptop, computer, cell phone, the login details and software that you have on there. There may be renewals on softwares that you may have subscribed to as well. If you've got any loyalty programs, frequent traveler as an example, the username and passwords, bank accounts, all the details of those and including your login details.
It'll take 6 months to just compile that. And you have to update it.
So the last few is basically your burial requests, where you want to be buried, who you want to be perform your last rites. If there are any specific bequests and charities that you want funds, obviously that will be part of your will as well. And the family must be aware of this file in the event of death or illness. So it's
excellent, Faisal.
Yeah.
And I think the listeners are going to ask, where can they access that list? It's a good list. And obviously there's a file that with your will and other things. And somebody in your family must have all those details. Sometimes, you give it to your wife and she dies before you. So then you're going to look at her assets and decide how. So Faisal, what I'll do is we'll make available that list. It's an excellent list. And it's sometimes you think you've got everything, but that covers most of it. So you'll make it available for us. We'll put it on our website and inshallah people can access it. Nafisa, you wanted to comment before I go back to Yasmeen?
Yeah, sure. I think just to add on, it's a very, very great list that Faisal has just shared with everyone. But to add on, I think it's important to add on divorce orders if there have been previous divorce orders, because that
your attorneys are quite sharp with divorce orders. But
what happens is pragmatically, when you're winding up an estate, you might find the ex-spouse making some claims, etc. So in this personal file, if you have your divorce order, it impacts also on properties that you might have acquired with that spouse prior to the divorce having taken place. If there's a talaq in place or that was issued, that too should be part of that personal file. And one more thing, and I think it's very, very important for women. I mean, it's a reality of life. As women, we might not like this.
Details of their second wives.
Precisely. and children of other marriages, because it becomes a nightmare. But it makes the
From a Sharia perspective,
process,
they may lay a claim. You said.
Yeah. Well, they're entitled to, or whether we like it or not, they're entitled to, even from a South African
You
perspective.
naughty men that are listening in, please listen carefully to Nafiza. Yeah, she's telling us something very important. Yasmeen, I want to bring you in. You mentioned capital gains tax, and some of our people say, what you're talking about. So maybe you want to just unpack a few examples of what constitute capital gains tax. For example, somebody has an investment in the equity market, and that is a subject on its own. And as part of the list that Faizal is talking about, they're going to get the value of those shares to put it part of the estate. Now, I want to cover, subject to time, how do we save tax? And I need to bring you in there as well. But maybe you just want to unpack. People don't realize that they're liable for capital gains tax when even they sell a property or sell shares or other forms. So perhaps you just want to unpack for the benefit of our listeners.
Everybody is quite well aware of income tax. The tax you pay on your salary, any interest income, any investment income, and so on. What some people may not know is that when you dispose of an asset, which you regard as a capital asset, and it could be, for example, shares in a share portfolio, it could be Kruger Rands, it could be unit trusts, it could be property. When you dispose of those assets, there's usually a capital gains tax event. And what you really have to look at is how much did I sell it for minus what was my cost, and the difference is what I must pay tax on. Now, if you are paying tax at the highest marginal rate of 45%, you'll pay 18% CGT on the disposal of that asset, and that's on the growth in the value. Right? Now, what happens is when you pass away, I think it's the day before you pass away, you are deemed to have disposed of all your assets. Right. So what happens is that the executor of the estate will have to establish what is the market value of all your assets at the time, at that time. And if those assets have grown in value compared to the cost, you could have a capital gains tax implication. Now, the typical kind of assets that give you capital gains tax would be things like I mentioned earlier on, would be like shares in companies, whether that's unlisted or listed shares. It could be unit trusts, Kruger Rands, property. What is excluded is usually like your primary residence. That's a big exclusion. And then a lot of our businessmen would have loan accounts with their companies or trusts or so. Those do fall into your estate, but don't give rise to capital gains tax because there your cost is equal to your market value. So it's not every single asset that gives rise to capital gains tax. And that capital gains tax is put into your last tax return, your date of death tax return. Right? Then separate to that, the executor will establish the value of your assets. Then those go into your estate for estate duty purposes, right? And there's a couple of things that I think the listeners should know about. I mean, if you do have a life insurance policy, if your life is the life assured, no matter who the beneficiary is, in most instances, the value of that life cover falls into your estate for estate duty purposes. So, what listeners need to be aware of is that if you're taking out a life insurance policy to make good on your liabilities in your estate, it needs to be big enough to cover, firstly, the estate duty on the policy itself. Right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, there are other exemptions. The most famous is your interspousal exemption. So if a husband leaves assets to his wife, then there's no estate duty on that. But obviously, in terms of Sharia, you are limited if you've got a Sharia will as to what your spouse is going to inherit from you, right? So there's a limit to how you can employ that exemption for a Sharia will. And then there's the 3.5 million rand exemption limit as well. So for those individuals that have got limited estates and so on, there's not a lot of fancy estate planning that's required, but it's essential to have your basic things like your wills in place, to have access to the documentation that Faizal mentioned, because no matter how small your estate is, you want to be able to get the distribution done in an efficient manner.
Now, just to pick up on what you said, if you've got an estate, much higher than 3.5 million in value. And that's where estate planning kicks in with the view to limiting your tax liability above the 3.5 million threshold. What are some of the suggestions you can make to our listeners who are way above that now, and how can they adjust? You mentioned that you can form trust, transfer that to the trust. If you have something, you sort of not as an asset in your name, maybe some shares, how do you transfer those, etc., etc.? Some of the sort of methodologies of saving tax.
Okay. So I think the first thing to note is that if you are earning a lot of money in your personal capacity, there's a limit to which you can actually reduce the value of your estate. When we do estate planning, we actually look at pegging a value of an estate rather than reducing it. Because reducing an estate means that you have to firstly give away assets. Unless you're giving it away to a charitable organization or to your spouse, you're going to trigger a tax implication through donations tax and capital gains tax. So when you embark on estate planning for bigger estates, usually if someone say it comes along and they're worth already 10 million rand, the idea is to make that 10 million rand remain 10 million rand and not grow into the future. Now, for some of us, it's impractical. If you take someone like myself or like Faizal, our earnings, we earn in our personal capacity, right? If you're a salaried employee, you're earning your income in your personal capacity. There's only so much you can't do anything but earn it in your personal capacity. So that's always going to add to your wealth, right? So there may not be like a sort of foolproof method to reduce your value of your estate, because your estate is always going to be growing because you're earning income on an ongoing basis. In a case like that, you manage your liquidity in a different way, or you manage the liability in a different way. A lot of my clients go towards taking life cover. There is a Sharia debate on whether life cover is acceptable or not acceptable. There are Sharia compliant products out there as well. And there's a difference of opinion in terms of if you use it for estate duty purposes. But a couple of my clients have said, I know that I can't avoid growing the value of my personal estate. I can't avoid it because I'm going to earn my income personally. The way I'm going to manage it is to make sure I've got a life cover big enough to cover my estate duty, so my children are not worried about having to sell my assets to pay my liabilities, So that's how we manage it. When it comes to pegging the value of the estate, we use trusts very often, but all you're doing there is making sure the future growth in the asset, and usually it will be like your investments, like shares, property, things like that would go into a trust. Then you can trap the growth in the value of those assets in the trust itself. Obviously, you have to do it properly because there's lots of anti-avoidance measures and all that they've built into the tax legislation, but it can be done. And it's still, one of the best vehicles for succession,
Faisal, you want to add to what Yasmeen is saying?
Yeah, so, the trust you mentioned. So I think you don't wait till your asset value is 10 million. You start when you're young. When you're starting to work and earn, you should also already be thinking about estate planning. So, if you say you want to avoid the tax, it's good to start young. So
can I just maybe add to that, right? Because that is the best thing to do. But what is prohibitive usually is the cost, and the complexity. So, people do perceive trust as being complex sort of structures to have in place. You need to have drop-out financial statements. You've got to submit tax returns. There's all these rules that you need to abide by and all that. So what we've observed, and Faisal is quite right, that if you want to estate plan, you must do it early on. Form that trust when you're just starting out and put your growth assets, your investments into that trust from the start. But most of us don't do that because of the cost and the headache. So some of us just get an insurance policy to just cover the estate duty. I'm just saying that's the reality of it.
Correct. And that's where we have to change our thinking as well, to say, listen, if we are going to grow our assets, so if you qualified as a medical practitioner or a chartered accountant, I don't know, chartered accountants don't earn that much nowadays, but yeah, so start planning and put your investments into the trust. We may think that trusts are expensive at the beginning, but it actually is well worth that cost that you're going to incur now. And then having a good financial planner as well to advise you in terms of your investments and in terms of growth of your assets going forward.
Yasmeen, yes, you can come in, Yasmeen.
Please have to say, when you mentioned like medical practitioners, you're starting off with your earnings. A lot of practitioners they're not allowed to earn their income like in a corporate structure. So even if you've got an incorporated practice, you have to personally be the shareholder in that incorporated practice. So, like us, if we are practicing as chartered accountants and so on, as lawyers, as medical practitioners, you're always going to be earning your income, your bread and butter in your personal capacity. So you're always going to be growing your estate, but you don't want to compound it by making sure that all your other assets are in your estate as well. So like you invest in a property or a unit trusts and things like that.
Correct. So it's basically just for your investments going forward, your income earning that stays with you. But also remember, we've got that donation exemption, the first 100,000 per annum that you could use, and you have your spouse. So you've got exemption of donation between spouses. So you've got 200,000 that you can donate to this trust or your investment of choice, or your vehicle of choice. So you start young and you can grow that.
Yes,
so your money goes into that trust, and as you invest, like you said, you've pegged that value.
Yes.
And you don't
and
have
that is the best way. But unfortunately, we see it all too often. Clients coming to us, they've already amassed a certain amount of wealth, and you can't reduce it. You have to just peg it at where it is at present.
Okay, on that note, we'll take a break for the news, and then we'll wrap up with Yasmeen Faizal immediately after the news break, and then we'll bring in our asset manager, Hassan, who's coming to talk about the tax. So let's take a break, and inshallah, after the break, we'll wrap up on this estate planning and tax situation or discussions.
An informative Islamic global perspective. This is Al Ansar News.
Making news this on the 30th of October. The news from Durban 90.4 FM, Pietermaritzburg 105.6 FM. Durban Taxi Association does not believe grievances will be addressed. America Monina, members of the Durban Long Distance Taxi Association, say they do not believe their grievances will be addressed anytime soon. Earlier today, they staged a blockade in the Durban CBD, impacting traffic on several roads. The protest, which began earlier in the week, is over claims the provincial transport departments delaying the issuance of their operating licenses. They are also unhappy about the Operation Channeler, the law enforcement drive that has seen unroadworthy minibuses of those operating unlawfully being impounded. As a result, long-distance routes to Zululand and Johannesburg are not operating. KwaZulu-Natal Transport has responded to the protest, saying over 115 permits have not been collected by the association. The operator, Skumbuzowa Nyako, says that they did not find any permits when they approached the department's offices near Victoria Embankment earlier today. Nyako says they were told they have to reapply for the permits. He also says reapplication for the permits is a 3-month process, which means their vehicles will be impounded once again while awaiting approval. He is calling for a temporary halting of the Operation Channeler. More news. Police in the Eastern Cape have launched a manhunt for a known number of suspects who allegedly gang raped 5 matric students. The matriculants were also robbed at gunpoint. Authorities say the investigation team will leave no stone unturned to ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says South Africa's economy is expected to grow by 1.1% this year. Godongwana has tabled the first mini-budget of the 7th administration in Parliament today. He is focusing, amongst other things, on the conduct of municipalities.
To resolve local government failures systematically, several initiatives are underway. The ESCOM Municipal Debt Relief Program is among these interventions. Since February, when we last reported on the relief program, around 70 of the municipalities that had applied for the debt relief have been approved. Between March and August 2024, compliance with the relief conditions by municipalities improved from 55% to 76%, aided by the National Treasury, Provincial Treasury, and the Municipal Finance Improvement Act. Rand West is the first municipality to benefit from 1/3 debt write-off. This follows its substantial achievement of the debt relief conditions for the first 12-month cycle. The more municipalities stand to benefit from the write-off, of that if they comply with the conditions of the program.
Staying with that story, John Stianizin of the DN Minister of Agriculture is responding to the minister's budget speech.
Well, I think it was the right diagnosis, and I think it was the right prescription and remedy for what we need. Getting debt under control, focusing on spending on infrastructure and growth rather than on consumption, and of course structural reforms. And this is what the medium-term budget policy statement's about, and it's what the medium-term development plan is going to be on. So I'm very pleased with the outcome. I think Minister Gondangwana and his deputies have done an incredibly good job, and I think it's certainly to be welcomed. And we can start to get South Africa onto the path to fiscal reform and a brighter future for our economy.
International story. Fighters from Iraqi resistance group have launched a string of attacks on strategic targets within the Israeli-occupied territories in retaliation for the regime's ongoing atrocities across Gaza and Lebanon. The resistance group in Iraq, an umbrella body of an anti-militancy fighters, in a statement published today, it claimed the responsibility for a drone strike on a vital target in the northern parts of the occupied land. It says that the attack was carried out in continuation of resistance against the occupying Israeli regime in support of Palestinians and Lebanese, and also in response to the massacres that the Zionist regime is perpetrating against unarmed Palestinians and Lebanese civilians. In your weather, it's 24 degrees. Quick reminder of our top story. Members of the Durban Long Distance Taxi Association say they do not believe their grievances will be addressed anytime soon. Earlier today, they staged a blockade in the Durban CBD. That's the news.
Famine, conflict, and severe economic decline make the humanitarian crisis in Yemen the worst in the world. More than 20 million Yemenis do not know where their next meal is coming from, and over 10 million are suffering extreme levels of hunger. With your support, the Al Imdad Foundation delivers essential food aid to starving Yemeni communities. It's a question of survival. So let's do what's right. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
This segment is brought to you by Kenfield Auto, your RMI approved service and repair specialist. 236 Brickfield Road, Overport. Kenfield Auto.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Inna Rabbana lawafurun shakur.
I won't start.
Kenfield Auto.
Noisy brakes.
Kenfield Auto.
Due for a service.
Kenfield Auto. Kenfield Auto. The answer to all your car problems. Your service and repair specialist for your VW, Audi, Suzuki, Toyota, or just about any vehicle. Kenfield Auto, your RMI and insurance approved workshop to handle them all. 236 Brickfield Road, Overport. Call us on 031 207 2399. Kenfield Auto.
Africa.
Education, health, dignity, empowerment. These wishes all begin with water. Africa Muslims Agency is committed to providing clean water to the thousands who still live without this basic human right. Support us in giving the best of charities. Provide a water well for 16,500 Rand or a borehole for 55,000 Rand in Afghanistan or 65,000 Rand in Africa. Gain Thawabi Jariyah and help communities to reach their full potential. Africa Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
This most repeated dua of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is brought to you by Continental Butcher Baker Deli. Quality, freshness, and value. Our promise to you since 1992.
يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلبي على دينك.
If you're looking for a delicious selection of freshly made baked goods, decadent deli treats, and succulent meats, there's no need to chop around anymore. Continental Butcher Baker Deli offers an award-winning service, presenting exceptional quality at competitive prices. Superb choice-grade lamb, beef, and chicken. Mouth-watering homemade processed meats and gourmet marinades, and scrumptious baked goodies. Quality, freshness, and a money-back guarantee. Visit Continental in Argyle Road.
Continental Sausage Circus, now featuring 80 different types of sausages. Hurry before there's not a sausage. Welcome to Simplex Radio. Visit our showroom for the full range of car audio. Our TV department carries top brands with quality LED panels, full HD to Ultra HD, and now the experience of Super Ultra HD. Visit our theater rooms and transform your home with brands like Onkyo, Integra, Denon, Boston Acoustics, Yamaha, and more for quality audio visual experience. Now available, full range of home appliances. A one-stop shopping experience. Call 031 306 4029 or Kenilworth Park, 202 Brickfield Road, Overport. Simplex Radio, the name you can trust.
Butterlicious, butterlicious, butterlicious. When the food melts in my mouth, so does my heart. Blended by our expert chefs with pure cotton seed oil. Divine lasts longer, so cook more with Divine. Divine makes every meal a special treat. It is Butterlicious. Approved as part of the Heart and Stroke Foundation Eating Plan, Cotton Mark SA, and a proudly South African product. Divine Cooking Oil. Butterlicious.
You've spent all that time, effort, and energy putting together an incredible business. Now, you need to tell people about your business. Advertising and marketing, it's what we do. Listen to this.
I'd like to say thank you to Al Ansar because after we aired last week, massive feedback, massive interest, which has been great. We've got so many potential clients in all the different areas from Pietermaritzburg to Durban North to Virginia.
Speak directly to your target audience. Get in touch with our sales department on 031 208 1601.
Radio Al Ansar, Durban 90.4 FM, Pietermaritzburg 105.6 FM.
Listen to News in Focus on Radio Al Ansar, Durban 90.4 and Pietermaritzburg 105.6 FM every Wednesday from 8 p.m. with Yunus Sacoor. That's 8 p.m. every Wednesday. Radio Al Ansar.
وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to the world. उठो बेसहारो चलो गम के मारो खबर ये सुनाओ हुजूर आ गए 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 अनोखा निराला पोजीशन आया वो सारे रसूलों के सुल्तान आया सुल्तान आया अरे बादशाह हो अरे तेजुला हो निगाहें झुकाओ हुजूर आ गए 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 हुआ चार सूर है उम्मतों का बसेरा उजाला उजाला सवेरा 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 हलीमा को पहुंची खबर आमिना की मेरे घर में आओ हुजूर आ गए हैं हुजूर आ गए हुजूर आ गए हुजूर आ गए
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to News in Focus live on Radio Al-Ansar International, broadcasting on the frequency Durban 90.4 FM, Pietermaritzburg 105.6 FM, and streaming on www.alansar.org.za. This particular show is live on Facebook and YouTube. I mentioned the show is interactive and we welcome your comments, which can be sent to us on the studio WhatsApp number 0609041056. But our guests have captioned us and caught us so much into listening attentively to the important advices they're giving us. Maybe you forgot to WhatsApp us, but if you want to WhatsApp us, and we can always get our guests back on another occasion to answer, or we could, link up with them and get responses. I do have the checklist. I'll post it on our website. Faisal kindly gave it to me, some very important information. Before the break, we need to wrap up because our guests have other commitments this evening. Yasmeen, perhaps you just want to give us some of your closing remarks, some tips on how to save tax, from an estate planning point of view. I know you don't want to deceive the receiver, but there's some smart ways of doing it. Perhaps you just want to conclude, Yasmeen.
So, I had a very wealthy client ask me, what's the best way not to pay any tax? And I told him the best way is not to make any money. And that's clearly not something we all want to do, right? So I think the answer is that if you are economically active, if you're working, if you're running a business, chances are you are growing your personal wealth. So I think what you need to be planning for is to make sure that your current affairs are run in the most efficient way possible. You're taking advantage of exemptions and deductions that you're able to. Like a common one as a basic example is, contribution to a retirement fund and things like that, using tax-free savings vehicles, putting money into your spouse's name or whatever it is, So there are various legitimate opportunities to sort of spread the burden and reduce your current burden. When it comes to estate planning, and you get wealth you anticipate that your wealth is going to grow, look at putting a trust structure in place. As Faisal said, you rather do it while you're young. Most of us do neglect it until we accumulate quite a lot of wealth in your personal name. But if you can do that earlier and bite the bullet and actually make do with all the admin and the administrative burden that comes with it, in the long run it will stand you in good stead. If you don't want to go that route, then you must just make sure that you make enough provision for the tax liabilities that will arise. And the most common way of doing that is either one of two things. Make sure that you have sufficient cash liquidity in your estate to make good on liabilities. Some of my clients have gone that route. Or, for example, or go through get a life cover to cover your duties, so that you're not leaving that burden to your family once you're gone.
Thanks very much, Yasmeen. Well presented. Faisal, your concluding remarks?
Yeah, I think Yasmeen and I have had quite a few experiences where we found that people have accumulated a whole lot of wealth and now are trying to work out how to give it away, whether to their children, their spouse, and what the cost of all of that is going to be. So I guess on the one hand, we can't complain. That's how we make our fees. But at the same time, you want to avoid and minimize the amount that you pay. So the first part would be, like I said, start young, bite the bullet, incur the cost, consult your advisors. I mean, sometimes you think that it's going to be a significant cost and, you won't see the benefit, but trust me, you will. And that's what my sort of advice would be, that, if you are growing your asset base, start planning from young and just make sure that, you have all your documents in order. Whatever your age, you should make sure you start that file. Like I said, I'll call it a personal file. And just put all the information that you accumulate, simple things like if you owe someone money, put it in there that, you owe this money, and anything happens to you, your family is aware that there's a debt that you have. That's the one thing we've been told, that you can get forgiveness for everything else except a debt.
Definitely.
If you owe money to someone.
And also very important is that liquidate the debt so that you don't have cash in your estate. But Faizal, listen, I think we ran out of time. You got another commitment. Yasmeen needs to go back as well. You just scratched the surface. We're going to have more discussions. We're going to, and you know, Hassan keeps on telling me now the tax that people are paying is being wasted because there's a lot of maladministration, corruption, and where's the value for money? So we're going to chat about that. We've got Narend Ganesh in the studio, and he wants to tell us how do we fix up these municipalities. He needs to leave. He's got an interview with the Caribbean. But I thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it, and we're definitely going to get you all back sooner rather than later, before the end of November, for a further interview on, and sort of our listeners, you know, you're more than welcome to give us some subjects that you want our tax practitioner and chartered accountants to cover. We've got Hassan, the other chartered accountant here. He's going to talk about today's midterm budget, whether we got some good news. John Steen, he's mentioned there's some good news coming through. But he'll always tell us that, listen, are we really getting value for money? So we're going to unpack that. But Yasmeen and Faizal, thanks very much for joining us. I know you'll have other commitments, and amidst your busy schedule, you'll have come in. Faizal, you just want to say something else before you conclude?
No, just to thank you for the opportunity. And like I said, you're welcome to share that checklist.
That checklist. No, most certainly. It's a well-typed checklist. We'll put it on our website, and we'll make it available to people. And Yasmeen, we will definitely get you back in the studio. Some very important information. You whetted the appetites of our people, and they want more information. Thank you very much. Nafiza will stay on with us. She's like a political stroke attorney and you know, estate planning practitioner. So she'll mix up and match with what we have here. But thanks very much for joining on. All the best in your future endeavors, and keep up the good work. Okay, I want to bring in Narend Ganesh. He's got a commitment shortly. Narend is a political analyst. He's an MBA graduate. He's a party head of NICSA, political commentator. And I specifically put a subject which is more than an hour's discussion, but we're going to wrap it up in 15 minutes, and maybe Hassan, myself, and Nafiza will continue. Last week, Narend, we spoke briefly about poor service delivery in all municipalities, and we were looking at options. But I want to welcome you in the interview live on Radio Al Ansar International, Narend.
Good evening to the listeners.
Narend, I sort of purposely said options to deal with poor service delivery, and some of the options we looked at last week, perhaps you may want to just add to those, is that and Hassan mentioned, there's a lot of maladministration, and we need to correct that, and the GNU is looking at that very critically. But in the municipalities, the state president has indicated that over the last few decades, they've neglected attention to service delivery at municipality level. All he did is he appointed a mayor, Kokta appointed a municipal manager, and that's as far as they went. They gave grant funding to the municipalities, but did not monitor whether there's value for money and how that funding was being utilized. We highlighted in previous weeks that the critical element in all municipalities was poor infrastructure maintenance and upgrade, and further incompetent cadre deployment and inefficient staff from the city manager downwards in many municipalities that culminated in maladministration, corruption, and no consequential management. So those are the problems. Our listeners want to know, how do we rectify those problems to improve service delivery? Perhaps you just want to give us a summary of some of the issues of areas that the municipality need to look at critically to really respond to the plea of our consumers, our ratepayers, our taxpayers on an improved service delivery. Because if you speak to 99.9% of our ratepayers and taxpayers, they just tell you that, we cut full with what's happening.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think you touched on the points that we covered previously, but I think the most important thing is that we must realize that at municipal level, at local level, is where the coalface of service delivery takes place. And one of the biggest problems South Africa has had since the advent of local municipalities, etc., is that we have political deployment. And what political deployment does is it eliminates meritocracy, because you put in your cronies and your friends who are associated with you politically and have no competence or capabilities to actually do the job function that each portfolio asks for. Secondly, we do not have the necessary oversight that we should be having when it comes to projects, and then thirdly, quite often the contractors are paid before the job is done. Just like when we're building a house, when the foundation is built, before the rest of the building comes through, the inspectorate has to come and approve the building. And that is how we should look at service delivery. And, the sad part about this is also, while we've got incompetent people in major and serious management positions who are incapable of doing the job, municipalities at great cost acquire consultants. And I put that in inverted commas. It costs quite a packet to get these consultants to advise those who should have known better. And as a result, service delivery becomes or is prejudiced in any aspect, from due to water outages, refuse recovery, etc., sewers. So we are handicapped at the moment, and the only alternative or remedy that needs to happen very, very fast and seriously is to reevaluate the kind of personnel we have in management who should have the necessary capacitance to create programs, to enforce performance and get service delivery done.
Just quickly, Narend, on what you were saying, and apparently our current mayor, Sacoor Kaba, he mentioned that he's on the ball, he's got his finger on the pulse, and people are back on track, really improving service delivery in eThekwini. I mean, a lot of our listeners from the eThekwini region, but I think the state president has looked at the mayoral positions and has put, mayors who walk the talk. And Sacoor Kaba is one such guy. He's having regular meetings with ratepayer associations and listening to what they're saying and implementing. And he said consequence management is going to follow. So, I know you've got a lot of colleagues, because the IFP is now strongly involved in province, and the Minister of Kokta is now looking at eThekwini municipality very closely and holding the mayor and the city manager to account. So do you see fundamental improvements in service delivery in eThekwini? Because one of the areas you mentioned is to look at the personnel, and if the personnel, are not guided and placed in, brought to order and brought to terms, and they are incompetent, then you need to remove them.
Yeah, no, you're entirely right. Look, the new mayor, let's say, new broom sweep clean. And as a result of that, obviously a lot of pronouncements will be made as to how this new cleanup is going to be and how the revamp of service delivery is going to happen. But unless it happens, or until it happens, where the proof is in the pudding, we will always be speculating on the might have beens and what can be done. But the reality, and it boils down to the very fact that you mentioned. Look, the state president has got nothing to do with the appointment of the mayors and stuff. Okay, he's involved in appointing the mayor of Minister of Kokta and stuff like that. But I think municipalities have now begun to realize, because of if you look at the amount of protests that we have in terms of service delivery, people are standing up. And I've warned, the mayor of eThekwini, for example, that if we don't deliver as, is instructive of their posts, the people are going to rise at some point, and it's going to be destructive to the entire municipality. There'll be more destruction, as we've seen in the past. So if we don't have oversight, competence, we are never going to get service delivery done. We can scream till we're blue in the face. But I don't want to bring a racial aspect into this, but what has happened in the past is, because the ANC was in the majority, we had a lot of black personnel being put into senior management who were rather incompetent. Not to say that there are other races who are competent, but they were not put there on merit. They were put there because of cadre and cronism and nepotism and all the sort. So that's where we stand with the issue of service delivery and its deliverance, as it were.
Narend, I know you've got sort of a Zoom interview with somebody in the Caribbean, and I don't want to hold you up any too long. Your final comments, Narend?
Look, I think we need to address this as the time goes along, and hopefully we'll be able to judge more in a more adequate way as the time goes on with regards to the mayor and the service delivery in eThekwini. But as it stands at the moment, let's say the status quo applies as it stands.
So, Narend is mentioning that, listen, the mayor is making all kinds of commitments and promises, but we can't see much on the ground other than some of the positive comments he's made. Time will tell whether it is an improvement. And hopefully in the next show, we should be able to see, because when you drive in the roads, you still see these potholes. When you drive down various roads, you see the light poles off, the lights are off. Water, leaks are taking long to repair, etc., etc. Narend, thank you for joining us this evening. I know it was a short stint with you, but some of the pertinent points you mentioned, we'll take this discussion further in future programs, including how do we deal with forthcoming local government elections, how do ratepayers, because that's our consistent subject, to get the ratepayers on their toes, to deal with pertinent issues, interact with municipal officials, hold them to account, because we're looking at basically options to improve service delivery. So we'll continue with that subject. And when you're available on another occasion, we'll unpack it. I'm sure you'll have more time. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you.
Narend, on your interview.
Thank you, and good evening to the listeners.
Thank you very much. I want to bring in Nafisa. Nafisa, you've heard our colleagues talking on estate planning, some pertinent issues. When you did the summary, you briefly spoke about some important issues we looked at. Now, you mentioned then that from a legal perspective, you got to ensure that you have your ducks in a row when winding up an estate, because ultimately that's where the legal eagles come in when they're winding up an estate. And there's a prescribed fee that's being charged, and that fee must be part of the liquidity to deal with it, because you don't want to start selling assets to cover those fees. Because a lot of attorneys will try their best to minimize the cost, but it comes at a cost. And the master wants all pertinent information when approving the winding up of an estate. But also attorneys have to unblock accounts to meet disbursements that the family requires. And if the deceased did not plan for that, you land yourself into problems, as our accountants were saying, that people don't even know how to meet the utility obligations and various other obligations because the bank accounts are frozen. So perhaps you want to give some pertinent information relative to that to alleviate those kind of problems.
Okay, yes, Yunus, we see it practically daily in our lives as attorneys, winding up, especially when we're winding up estates, and it causes a lot of inconvenience for family members. So what happens is we end up having to sell assets of the estate, and sometimes even the family home has to be sold to defray expenses. Now, in order to to alleviate these problems, one has to start well in advance. Like our chartered accountants were saying, both Yasmeen and Faizal mentioned this, that you got to start doing things quite early in life, where you create for liquidity for your estate. Either you build up cash reserves, you put in monies into with your attorney in a trust account, you create a trust, you create life policies, or you buy into life policies, retirement annuities, so you don't end up having the liquidity issues. But on that point of having to start before you actually, encounter death and not leave the issues for your family, I think it's also important to inform the listeners that we've spoken about estate planning and the number crunching around estate planning. We've spoken about financial planning, and Yasmeen spoke of that and the differences between that. But very often what people forget is that there's a legacy plan to this whole thing. And that's where the attorneys normally come in. So there's things like, especially for people who are in business for their own account, things like putting general powers of attorneys in place. So prior to the death, and if you are incapacitated for any reason or unable to deal with bank accounts, etc., then the power of attorney can help you to appoint somebody to act on your bank accounts, create liquidity, etc. There's a whole other aspect with regards to curators being appointed, but that is if you are unable to make decisions, but that for another time, because that's another broad topic on its own. But I also think it's very important that from well in advance, you should consider a very important aspect, also links in with very, very much from a Sharia compliance point of view, is a marriage system that you are married into. Whilst there's recognition for Islamic marriages, many of the older marriages are still community of property marriages. And that means that on your death, your estate is not being wound up according to Sharia compliant laws.
So that becomes a huge obstacle.
So a huge obstacle indeed. So
I'm going to unpack that a little bit later. I want to bring Hassan in now. Hassan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hassan, today was the midterm tax budget review, and some of the politicians, particularly from the GNU, have given positive feedback on the Minister of Finance budget for a midterm budget. Perhaps you just want to cover some highlights of the budget, both the positive and negative side of it.
Sure. Interesting thing, I think if we didn't have a GNU and it was just an ANC government, I'm pretty sure the comments from the likes of John Steenhuisen and some of the other members would have been a lot more negative than what they had stated there. Because if you saw what the minister had presented today, has largely been in line as to what he had presented in his budget in February this year and what he had presented in October last year. So it's a continuing theme of trying to maintain some fiscal stability and trying to rein in expenditure and the like. The positive, I think the positive that's coming out of the budget is that they are focusing on a couple of key areas. Areas such as infrastructure is being highlighted. While they didn't talk a lot about maintenance of the current infrastructure that we have, and we realize it, I mean, whether it's in our suburbs and the different municipalities across the country, we're having challenges. They are talking about spending on infrastructure, new equipment, new assets and the like over the next few years. So I think there is a focus on that. They're realizing it's an issue. And to try and drive economic growth, you need to have a bit more stable infrastructure as well. So I think they're trying to do that. I think the second key area that's come in line, and it's a big issue, is that expenditure, they are reining it in to some extent. Because if you look at excluding debt service costs, the budget is actually expected to be a surplus for the coming year. So what that means is our revenue collection versus what we are spending on, excluding our debt. So what the revenue means, all the taxes, whether it's income tax, VAT, all those are all forms of taxes. The negative there is that SARS is expecting to have lower than expected revenues for the coming year. And it's a variety of issues, whether it's fuel levy. Remember, because fuel prices has come off as well, you're finding that also the fuel revenue generation has come down a bit, and then VAT collections has come back a bit on the imported items that's coming into the country. So there's a couple of key things that has resulted in revenue collection expected to be lower. But on the expenditure side, they are reining in and they're trying to manage in terms of the one key risk on expenditure excluding debt is on the wage bill. The wage bill remains the biggest issue. Now, government had proposed that they were expecting around a 3.5% type of increase for the year ahead, for the negotiations that's taking place, and they will set the tone for the next 2 years or so. Unions, and you saw COSATU was protesting outside the venue of where the midterm budget was, basically protesting and talking about better wage increases and all of those issues. Unions are talking about 12%. I think there's going to be some compromise, but I think government will probably settle around 4.5% or somewhere around there. But the fact is higher than what they've expected. So that is still the challenge. To put up, I think it's good to always compare us in terms of our wage bill, the government wage bill, relative to other countries. If you look at other countries, I've just got the stat here that came out. It shows that our general wage bill, in 2022, they compared it to countries across the world. Ours represented about 13.6% as a percentage of GDP, our government wage bill. 13.6%.
And what is the average,
And
international average?
the international average, if you look at it, is 10.1%.
So we're 3% above the average.
3.5% higher. That's a massive amount. The only other countries higher than us are really these Nordic countries such as Iceland and Denmark. And they, because they have obviously a lot more social structure, but there's government, the employees are there, but they're a lot more efficient. They're giving value for money. And when you're paying your taxes there and you're paying, we're paying one of the highest taxes in the world. But then the likes of Denmark and those places, they're getting fantastic pension. When you're unemployed, you get a nice, monthly income for the time that you're unemployed till you get employment again. There's a lot of social benefits that are properly
And the
in
standard
place.
of service delivery is much
Standard
higher.
of service delivery is much better. This is unfortunately not the case here. Government is looking at an initiative over the next 2 years. They're going to try. Yunus, you would have known about it. This happened many years back. Where they're looking at trying to encourage some of the employees to take early retirement. So over the next 2 years, there's an incentivization to try and encourage some early. They're budgeting about 11 billion rands over the next 2 years, where potentially a portion of the workforce will take early retirement. The result of that is many of those won't be replaced. So it means longer term, the overall wage bill, those that go out, it naturally drops down. So that's another way that they're going to try and looking at reducing the
So
wage bill.
they've alluded to the fact that we have probably 20% more staff that we should be having.
Correct. So that for them, the key issue is the wage bill and managing the wage until such time economic growth improves. Now, Minister Gonwana talked about today, only expected 1.1% GDP growth for this March 2025 expected, which is lower than anticipated. It's okay. And for the next 3 years, averaging around 1.7, 1.8%. It's still not, we need like a 3% type of growth rate to really start getting employment improvement and driving the economy. So I think there's expectations for some improvement, but not at the levels where you'll see growth in employment, growth in revenue collection, and therefore then improvement in terms of the debt. Now I come to one of the biggest issues, debt. Debt is expected to be this year, or for the February 2025 year, is expected to be close to 75% of GDP. That's massive. To put into perspective, 15 years ago, our debt was around 627 billion rands, which was about 24% of GDP. For the 2026 year, government is expected debt to go to 6 trillion rands. That's a tenfold increase from 15 years back. And that's representing 75.5% of GDP. That's massive. Remember we talked a few weeks ago that every rand 20 cents is going. Minister Gonwana is saying now for the next 3 years is looking at 21 and 22 cents per rand going towards servicing debt. That's a massive amount still going towards debt servicing. And that is the biggest issue, is our debt issues. Now, fortunately, I think he didn't talk about bailouts for any of the SOEs and the like, but he highlighted two key institutions. Besides, obviously, ESCOM is sort of slowly setting themselves, and municipalities remain the biggest issue, and they're trying to manage some of that. But the road accident fund, it's a nightmare of note, an absolute nightmare. Their liabilities are expected to increase. I think I must get the number, but like from about 450 or 60 billion, 450, 460 to over 500 billion rands over the next 2 to 3 years. And while road accident levies are expected to increase in that period also by about from 45 to 55, 60 billion, the liabilities are still increasing because of the challenges of this road accident. That is a big risk to our budget and to the country also over the next few years. this road accident fund. And there has to be some solution to try and address this liability, and we need to get this risk sort of reduced substantially over the next few years. And unfortunately, we don't have that.
There was talk about the finance minister dealing with the financial commitment of the NHI. What did he mention? Because I know in the GNU, some of the parties are concerned about the NHI.
Sure. I didn't pick up any major indications. I think NHI, if there is anything to highlight in terms of key expected spending and the likes, it may come through in the February budget. But I think because there's so much behind the scenes, lobbying and the like taking place between the medical fraternity, the hospital groups, the medical insurers like the Discoveries and the like, and government. I think there's still a lot of discussions and lobbying going on. I don't think there was any firm indication as to what the NHI, we can't afford it at this point in time. Unless we're going to be prepared to pay, a bit more towards our taxes, it's going to hurt in terms of the cost. The cost is going to be quite substantial. I think over time, there could be a working relationship and a potential solution between both the public and the private sector. So the medical aids and the hospital companies and the private companies working with government towards a potential solution, and where you could have a combination of maybe, medical aid and also, but as it stands at this point in time, the costs are quite substantial, and we just don't have the balance sheet and the revenue collections and the like to sort of service and envisage NHI. So I think NHI is going to still take some time to sort itself out and get to a sort of a proposal where they want to get to, but there is going to be steps made towards it. I think the current government, while the partners within the GNU, like the DA and the like, are still very opposed and anti the proposal, the ANC is still strongly in favor of this. And I think the intention is to move towards an NHI type solution in the future, but I don't see it being rolled out within the next year or two, as envisaged in the NHI legislation per se.
Now, amidst all this, those who have invested in equity market, those that have funds in the pension fund, they were obviously smiling because their returns have been phenomenal in the last 12 months. As you mentioned, the JSE is sitting at around 87,000 compared to about 65,000 last year this time. Now, that has actually picked up, the investment returns by over 20%. There's also, corruption is being dealt with. So obviously funds are being channeled into service delivery. And there's a buzz in economic activity. You mentioned, the tourist industry is booming in the Western Cape, even in KwaZulu-Natal. There's lots of foreign investments coming in. Various hotel groups are coming to the various cities. And so the GNU past 100 days is giving a positive sentiment. Although you have the opposition coming in and we have local government elections around the corner, prior to you coming in, we spoke to Narend Ganesh about how can municipalities improve service delivery, and there's a couple of options they're looking at. So in terms of the positive sentiment that's coming through, to which the citizens are benefiting, do you see that continuing? Because a lot of people who have investments in their pension funds with the asset managers, and you are an asset manager, and you know how people's returns have increased. In fact, the value of their investments have increased. So people are smiling, unlike last year when there was negative. Your comments in that regard, Hassan?
Sure. I think we've had a really fantastic run in the South African equity market over the past year, more so during the last few months per se. I think the renewed optimism in the country post the GNU has played some part in that. But I think you've also seen South African companies have started to come through and deliver some decent results over the last couple of months. Some of the retailers have come up with good results, whether it's the likes of Mr. Price, Truworths, and the likes of the clothing retailers slowly have started to. But even the food producers have been producing some fantastic results. The likes of AVI, they produce Baker's biscuits and those things. But we know it. because majority of us have seen the cost of all those products increase substantially over the past year. Think about what we pay now for I enjoy 11 creams. Go and see what you owe Romani creams. What you used to pay for Romani creams 12 months ago and what you pay now. Guaranteed at least a 20% increase. 20% increase in your biscuit prices. Go and look what you used to pay for whether it's bread and the like. Bread not too long ago, 12 months back, you're paying for a loaf of white bread, you're paying around 14 rands, maybe 15. Now the average price is 18 rands. Again, big increases. So the food producers, they've pushed through a lot of price increases. The retailers have pushed it through. While they may have seen some tailback in terms of their costs, but they're maintaining still the pricing. Now you've seen their margins have improved nicely for the food producers and in some of the food retailers as well. So with the result, the company share prices have moved up very strongly. So South African companies have also started to see very, very strong. I think the area where still some of the South African companies and companies on the JSE are finding it tough is within the commodities and the mining space. Platinum is still under pressure. Gold has had a phenomenal run. Gold is hitting record highs on a weekly or daily basis. $2,750. And not too long ago it was $2,000. So it's moved up, but it's obviously from a geopolitical perspective what's happening globally, the war in the Middle East. So where there's uncertainty, there's issues, there's concern around risk and concern around the world. People buy into gold. Not only individuals, you have found that governments and reserve banks around the world have been stockpiling gold over the last 12 to 24 months because there's also concern around the stability and sustainability of the strength of the US dollar. The US is just printing money. They are printing, and their debt is also ballooning quite substantially. And that remains a risk also for their country as well. So with the result, the likes of China, India, many of these other big countries, Japan, they are buying gold and stockpiling gold as well as a means of, for their reserve banks and central banks as means of security and strength for their respective currencies as well. So gold has but from a South African perspective, iron ore has been weak. Platinum has been weak. Coal has been weak. These are big exported products of our country. So with the result, those companies have faced a bit of pressure. But by and large, the South African Inc., they've had a very good, the banks, they are printing money at this point in time. They're doing very well because you've had a high interest rate. Now, while rates are coming off, they have benefited as well. So you are seeing that particularly the South African stock market, you're right, it's probably about 25-27% increase over 1 year. So it's been a very good year. So I think pension funds, by and large, those that are in most of your defined contribution type of funds, you've seen your funds moving up very nicely. Alhamdulillah. So with the result, that means the sustainability of your pension fund longer term is fantastic. So always the risk remains like if you draw too much from your pension fund to sustain your living and sustain your lifestyle, sometimes you may draw too much, and it come 10-15 years down the line, you potentially could run out of money, and it has happened.
Do you see the trend continuing, the upward movement of?
I think we've had a strong run. I think for the current,
level out.
Yeah, I think it'll level out.
Not decline drastically.
Highly
unlikely.
Yeah, unlikely to decline drastically. I don't think
those investors just hang on to your investments in that portfolio you are.
Yes. I think it's always good to have the balanced portfolio. So not necessarily just pure. Balanced portfolios have a combination of equities, a bit of property, and also income. So it gives you a bit of stability. You can go between
a balance or a defensive portfolio.
Correct.
So that you got... Now, I just want to throw a couple of curveballs to you. I met a few French visitors who came to South Africa a few weeks ago, and I was comparing prices with them. Relative to them, we're far cheaper. For example, the price of petrol in France is about $27 a liter. We are around 20 with the rand improving. The price of bread is about 22 rand. Every commodity I compared was 20% more. So we still relatively reasonable in our pricing. And you take your biscuits. Sometimes the special offers, Mari is 2 for 30. So it's not too bad. And we don't have a starvation problem in South Africa because everybody is fed. We got a good agricultural industry. So we have to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's blessed us. But, from an Islamic perspective, we get rain free of charge. We get oxygen free of charge. When you go to the hospital, they charge you an arm and a leg to give you oxygen. Water, you want to buy it, that it costs $6 or $7 for 500 ml. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us as rain. We just got to ensure that it's adequately drained into the dams and purified to come into our taps. And then you take food. We get it through our agricultural industry. You get your tomatoes, potatoes, etc. You plant the seeds. Allah gives you all the various commodities. Allah is reminding the ummah that I give you this free. You're attaching prices to it. Value it. Make shukr. Because when you close your eyes, that gold and that money and all is going to come to nothing. Nafisa will be dealing with your estate planning and she'll take 1/3 away for the tax man, 10% away for the fees, and your family is left with limited amount. So you want those amals to bless you in the qabr, utilize it properly. So Hassan, I know we're running out of time. We got about 10 minutes left. We need to wrap up. I've got another conference call to make just after 10. Your closing comments.
Sure. I think there's a couple of key things. Just firstly, closing off in terms of the minister's budget. I think net it was a neutral budget, a midterm budget. Key things is there are some positives. There's some positive momentum coming towards the country. There has been progress being made in terms of the GNU, whether it's on the infrastructure side, I think on the SOE side, Minister Baba Krisi, I think she's making good headway in terms of on the transport area and trying to resolve some of the challenges being faced there. I think there is some positive momentum. And tourism, do not underestimate the potential that can have for this country. Cape Town is not only the main tourist destination. Currently it is. Areas such as KZN, we've got the Drakensberg, we've got the North Coast, the South Coast, Durban Golden Mile itself. There's great opportunity to leverage that.
And of course, the Durban Summer Souk from the 24th December 100%. To the 5th.
If you look at our December, January, the risk, we've got such beautiful coastlines and the like, and we've got beautiful weather. We must have it. The risk still remains, again, management of that. And again, recently I read yesterday, the day before, some of the beaches on the South Coast, Toti and the like, were closed because of E. coli levels again went up. But fortunately, majority of the North Beach and South Beach and those places in Amshlanga.
So in December, we're going to get our tourists coming in.
So if you have those things are there, the tourist numbers should come through and we should have a good December, a good January, and that again boosts employment, it improves boosts growth as well. So I think those are the positives. The negatives for us still remain expenditure and debt for this country. Those are key issues. Expenditure, we got to manage the wage bill. Spend towards more productive and important things like infrastructure. Spending on those that are driving service for us and helping us. Whether it's the police force, whether it's the healthcare workers. Those are where you want to spend it because they create value and they help and they are productive to society. The debt is a challenge. And I think it's going to be a challenge still for the next few years until we get to a point where the economy is growing, our revenue is growing, and then it slowly helps to reduce our debt levels as well. So I think there's a positive momentum going towards the end of the year and going towards next year as well. We must try and sort of leverage that and drive economic growth. And I think you are seeing both foreign investors and local investors seeing that, and there's going to be an increase and sort of focus in terms of investing in this country over the next few years.
So there is a promising 2025 on site. Nafisa, you got 3 minutes to give us your closing comments.
Yes. So, we were talking largely about estate planning and estate planning issues, financial planning, and hearing Hassan and hearing that all the positivity with growth, etc. I want to say to the listeners that, estate planning should not be seen as a life end plan or decision to do things at that stage. But it should be a process where you manage throughout your life from the time that you, start accumulating assets. So you start employment itself. And it should be dealt with and managed consistently and over a period of time, and not just left to the end. And the other thing is, I want to say to your listeners, please ensure that you always educate yourself, whether it's about estate planning. Today we spoke a lot about wills, estates, deceased estates, financial planning, etc. But in general, even dynamics like economic growth, etc., and how it impacts on your estate, or even your marriage, how it impacts on your estate, finances, number crunching. So the key is education and self-educating. And, Al-Ansar has provided such a beautiful platform for that. So, they can always phone in, listen in, and there's a lot of knowledge being shared. Alhamdulillah.
No, Alhamdulillah. I think we had a very interesting discussion tonight on News in Focus. We had 3 chartered accountants. We had an MBA graduate and an attorney covering estate planning, taxes, and wills. I think the emphasis is on to ensure we plan, these things efficiently so that we don't regret later. We also need to invest a few bobs in getting financial advice and legal advice so that we covered. I think very important as a closing remark is to ensure that we invest for the akhirat. No sense amassing all this wealth and then when you close your eyes, you got nothing to benefit you in the qabr. So it's important that you ensure that your zakat is up to date, your other charitable offerings are up to date, that you do your good amals, utilize your wealth effectively, because to provide wealth upon your demise for your family is also a high form of ibadat, hence the need for estate planning. But I want to thank the guests that came and joined us this evening: Faizal Suleman, Yasmeen Suleman, Nafiza, and Hassan Motala. As usual, he joins us. He gave us an up-to-date on the midterm budget. Narend, Ganesh for giving us a bit of a summary on some of the options to deal with service delivery. We will continue with these topical subjects going forward. We hope to have further programs covering our souk, which is basically an economic opportunity for emerging entrepreneurs, where people can utilize their time profitably in December. Our annual souk commences on the 24th of December to the 5th of January. And we've got some very important work that the Al-Ansar Foundation is planning to do to empower our entrepreneurs, and at the same time respond to the education needs of the disabled children, because there's very limited educational opportunities for the disabled. So the Al-Ansar has what we call the Ibn Masud School of Excellence, and we have more than 120 learners that attend the school every year, and we want to do a program to explain the need for our community to assist in ensuring that we take care of our disabled, because it's our responsibility. So next week we will be having programs covering those subjects, and we will have INX on a live TV coverage. We will announce the programs during the course of the week. So some interesting programs are coming across in the near future. And that brings us close to today's program. We have to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of this universe. We have to make du'as for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, in Palestine. They're facing extreme difficulties. The least we can do is talk about it and make du'as for our Muslim brothers and sisters that are facing enormous challenges abroad. We have to make shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the ni'mats that He's blessed us with, but by the same token, obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandments as shown to us by Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. And a prerequisite to all that is to be up to date with our 5 times salah, men in the masjid, women at home. We have to be charitable, serve the needs of others, and those that are in need, assist them. Until our next program, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.